Hello, everybody. This is Eric Sinrod from Dwayne Morris. I'm joined by Jonathan Armstrong Recordery. You're getting your most recent Tech Law 10 episode. Who knows? We've been doing many of these for a long time. I think you'll find this one very interesting. Jonathan has a lot of interesting things to say. I'm thinking he's very intelligent, artificial intelligence. Please
Well,
speak.
well done as ever, Eric, and thanks all for watching or listening. Thanks particularly to the new listeners who are joining us from the Compliance Podcast Network. And we're really pleased, Eric and I are both really pleased to have joined Tom Fox's channel in talking about these matters there as well. So yeah, I've been thinking about AI, but I've been reflecting actually on a conversation that I think we had a few years ago, and I know I definitely had, without name dropping, with Max Schrems at a conference where I interviewed him. And this was about, I think we called it at the time, the sort of golden triangle of regulation for data protection, data privacy. And as a recap, that was regulation by data protection regulators, by fair trade regulators, and by competition antitrust regulators in each corner of the triangle. And it just struck me that just as that was true for GDPR type issues, then my prediction's going to be that we'll see this golden triangle become very important in AI regulation as well. And I think we had something of a first taste of that this week in the UK, where obviously there have been a number of actions against Meta, the artist formerly known as Facebook, for the way in which it handled people's personal data, and a number of class actions that haven't really got off the ground. But what happened this week is that effectively one of those group actions came back again, but as a competition law case, an antitrust case, not a conventional privacy data protection class action. And this could be a pretty large case. The case has been brought, as I say, to the Competition Appeal Tribunal, a specialist tribunal that deals with antitrust matters, on behalf, it's said, of 45 million users of Facebook. And effectively, instead of being based on misuse of data, the case is more or less based on market dominance. So, did Facebook own so much of the social media landscape that they were market dominant and they abused that market dominance position? And this is significant for a lot of reasons. Firstly, I think because the CAT, this specialist competition appeal tribunal, has been more ready to engage in what you might call US style class actions, so they can be opt out rather than opt in. And the numbers work better for those trying to bring those class actions as a result. It's important to remember as well that whilst in the US, wrongdoing can lead to bounties. So whistleblowers, for example, can go to government if they think the US government's been ripped off and they get cut into the deal. In the UK, that's not permitted at all, with the one exception being antitrust competition law issues, where the bounties are still small. There's a maximum of £250,000, but it might incentivize some people to complain more about antitrust issues when they think they can be personally rewarded, particularly those who are insiders in organizations who have had quite a lot of US bounty payments. And it's important to remember as well that people from the UK do whistleblower in the US as well. So it definitely is a two-way street. And so is AI a situation where we might see monopolistic practices, or when I did economics at school, what we used to call oligopolies, where a small number of large corporations get together and distort the market? Well, I think almost certainly your gut reaction would be yes. If you look at generative AI, then obviously we've got some big tech players in that market. People like Meta, people like Microsoft, with its very strange relationship with OpenAI, that looked like it had the potential, I say the potential, to distort the market. And people like Google, very active in that market. So these big tech players that have been criticized for market dominance in areas like social media are potentially open to the same criticism when we look at AI, or at least subsections of AI, like Gen AI. And having gone down this rabbit hole a bit, as you could probably tell, I then started to look at Common Crawl. I don't know whether Common Crawl is in any way familiar to you, but it's almost like a utility company on the internet. So those of us who are geeky enough to experiment with these things will have heard of something called the Wayback Machine that crawls the internet and effectively creates an archive of content. Well, Common Crawl, in some respects, does something broadly similar. It goes out and it collects web pages. It visits about between 3 and 5 billion, with a B, 3 to 5 billion URLs at a time, and effectively gathers content from the internet. It's a not-for-profit corporation, but it has been set up by a former Google executive, somebody who sold his business to Google and then went to work for them. It crawls the internet every month, and it includes some copyrighted data in its crawling. And in some respects, that's what's made Common Crawl come to more public attention, because as a result, it's been implicated in some copyright litigation over its crawling then appearing in AI. And as I said, it does between 3 and 5 billion URLs each month. So what's that got to do with AI? Well, because a lot of people have started to use Common Crawl's big pot of data to train AI, and it's gone from a relatively small, relatively unknown not-for-profit to a business which some people say 80% of Gen AI worldwide is trained on Common Crawl data. Now, it's public knowledge that ChatGPT 3 was trained on Common Crawl data. OpenAI seem to be heavy users of Common Crawl. Meta have used it. Google has used it as well. I spoke to an insider at who's leading AI development for one of the world's largest tech companies last week, and put to him this estimate that 80% of Gen AI relies on Common Crawl. He said, I think the number is significantly higher. He said, as far as he understood, every major Gen AI offering was using Common Crawl data either as the sole source of training data or as a source of training data. But obviously, as well as the antitrust issues here, the fact that so much of the development of AI seems to be in the hands of so few players, there are all sorts of other considerations as well. I mean, obviously, if you concentrate the development of AI in so few hands, then there are all sorts of risks around discrimination, lack of diversity, lack of understanding, etc. But also, it seems that almost the original purposes of Common Crawl can predicate against safe AI. So as just one example, Common Crawl collects hate speech, partly because it was originally set up for academics to understand what was happening on the internet. And there is a body of academics, my daughter happens to be one, that are trying to understand things like hate speech on the internet to get a scale of how big the problem is. So obviously, for those reasons, they need unfiltered data to work out how bad the issue is. And Common Crawl produces unfiltered data as a result. But if you then use that pot of data to train Gen AI, then it normalizes things like anti-Semitic content, things like hate speech. So there's a conflict, if you like, between the reason that the data was collected and the reason it's now being used, which I think should be a real concern for us as well. So I'm afraid I don't have any answers, but but one of my answers almost is to use our podcast to at least shine a light on what it seems to me is happening, because if we shine a light on it, then we'll understand some of the limitations in some of the current Gen AI models. And if we understand that, then things like the fact that Replica AI spouted hate speech allegedly and used sexually graphic content allegedly become more explicable, because Common Crawl is using things like Reddit chat rooms, which I've never joined one, but I'm led to believe are not like a Vicar's Tea Party in terms of the language used, etc. So I don't know whether you had any thoughts. I know, as ever, I didn't tell you in advance what the topic was, but what do you think of that?
That was a lot, Jonathan. And as you were talking, you were anticipating my next thoughts. So I would say to myself, well, this is my rejoinder, but then you would go there. So I'm going to be brief in terms of responding to you. Then I'm going to introduce another subset of an AI concern here. I'm glad you mentioned copyright, because I was thinking about that. That was something I discussed with you in a relatively recent video podcast, so I won't repeat myself. When we think about antitrust issues, at least here in the US, what the law really considers is harm to competition itself, not harm to a specific competitor per se, but harm to competition and ultimately harm to the consumers. So at least under US law, we would look at whether there's market dominance, perhaps, in AI, and then does that redound to actual detriment to competition itself, and then thus to consumers. So something to think about in terms of the law here. But what I wanted to talk about in this area, and again, we don't exchange ideas in advance, so this is all very impromptu, has to do with AI also. Once upon a time, a couple of years ago, we didn't talk about AI. We do now. You were throwing out billions, 3 to 5 billion URLs, for example. But I want to talk about elections, because that's pretty important to us. U.S. This is a presidential election year. We have a pretty divided country. We've spoken about that before. But according to my recent reading, more than half of the world's population coming up is getting set to vote in elections around the world. And tech leaders and lawmakers and civil society groups and others are concerned that AI could cause confusion and chaos for voters in a number of ways. And at this point, more than a dozen tech companies that are involved in building or using AI technologies are pledging to work together to try to detect and counter harmful AI content in elections. And this would include, deep fakes of political candidates and things like that could be problematical. And they're getting very hard to detect what's real and what's fake. Some of the members of this coalition include OpenAI, Google, Meta, Microsoft, TikTok, Adobe, and others. And they have this agreement called the Tech Accord to Combat Deceptive Use of AI in 2024 Elections. And that sounds great in terms of a title. And apparently they're committing to collaborate on technology to detect misleading AI generated content and to be transparent, hopefully, with the public about efforts to address potentially harmful AI content. And I recall, now this is going way back in history, the Wayback Machine called Sinrod, 8 years ago, we were deeply worried about what social media was doing in terms of misleading information that could sway voters here in the United States when the election was between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. And now here we are in 2024, and it looks like the election is going to be between our incumbent President Biden and Donald Trump, the former president. And how can we try to assure that the information that voters receive is not misleading as generated by AI? And that's the idea here. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's a really challenging topic, isn't it? We've already had an attempt to influence the London mayoral elections in the UK by some deep fake content. I think it is a real challenge. I know that some legislatures are looking at almost emergency legislation, conscious of the fact that it is an election year for you and for us. I know, as you know, I'm on the New York State Bar Task Force. We had a presentation from Clyde Vanel, who's an assemblyman, I believe, in New York, who has some interesting legislative proposals. And Godspeed to him, really, and to legislation like that, because I think we are worried about the role that AI might play in elections, particularly the role of AI in the hand of nation states. And almost certainly, that's a tidal wave about to hit us. So the approach has to be, I think, legislative and administrative, if you like. It's good that we're getting that compact of tech businesses that you talked about joining together. I know personally that there are people at Facebook in the past, Lord Allen, for example, who've cared deeply about these issues. And it has to be a joint response, doesn't it? I think of legislation and some administrative measures as well. But it's a real concern.
It's a real concern. The devil's in the details. Time is running out. We keep talking about time, the Wayback Machine, but the elections are going to be for us very quickly. So,
yeah, as
they say, we shall see. But thank you for shining the light. As you said earlier, your thoughts are always well considered and informative. You are a leading light. I'm honored to spend time with you during these TechLaw10s, as we've been doing for, oh my gosh, well more than a decade. Almost a decade and a half, I think. So I think all that remains to do now is to say goodbye to folks. So I'm Eric Sinrod at Duane Morris. I'm based in the San Francisco office. My email is ejsinrod@duanemorris.com. Jonathan?
I'm Jonathan Armstrong, jonathan.armstrong@corderycompliance.com. Thanks so much for listening to us. Obviously, you can go back and listen to the archive at techlaw10.com or through the Compliance Podcast Network now. And we also have a LinkedIn group. Always happy to receive your comments on this or on other topics. And all that remains is to thank you all for listening. We'll speak to you again in a few weeks' time.
Thank you. Cheers.
Take care.